Greetings and welcome to this edition of Audit Tuesday GRC podcast. Today we are going to discuss the challenges in building an enterprise GRC program. To do this, we have world-class expert on this topic, Jennifer Felix-Shannon, who's actually really fun to talk to, and this is going to be a great discussion.
Amazing.
You attest and myself can attest to Jennifer's knowledge in GRC because we have worked directly and will come out on this podcast for many years. And Jennifer's had a big hand. I mean big, not like, just hypothetical, in making UAttest, the product that that we're talking about sometimes, a functional, scalable GRC product. Welcome, Jennifer. Why don't you start by telling the audience your background?
Thanks, Garrett. Happy to be here. I'm started with Arthur Andersen. So I kind of bridge the gap between external audit, internal audit, and GRC. Started in external audit with Arthur Andersen when that Titanic sank, unfortunately. Moved through definitely other Big Four. So I went to Grant Thornton, was over at Deloitte for many, many years before I transitioned into the private sector, working in an internal audit. Worked for Lionsgate for 8 years, heading their internal audit department on the IT and the business process side. And then luckily made a huge transition to GRC, which I'd never really done before, over at Mattel. Spent 6 years kind of building their GRC program out. And that's where you and I met, and you gave us a great tool that we were able to work with and build. So that's
so you worked in both internal and external audit?
I did, yes. And now, now I have my own consulting business because, it's kind of where the next progression has been. But yeah, I work both internal and external. So external side, and then also on the internal side, and then GRC. So I've kind of got all of it,
I'm going back through the memories of our conversation of when we built out UAttest for Mattel, et cetera, and the wisdom on both the internal side and knowing what the external should have. That's right. That makes complete sense. Okay. All right. Let's jump into it. So you spent more than 20 years in GRC. Looking back,
that's correct.
What do you think separates world-class GRC programs from the ad hoc ones, which I'm not faulting anyone because we have a lot of, I don't use the word SMB, but middle market customers who are embedding their GRC products, their campaigns.
So I would say this is actually what I built my consulting practice around. This idea of compliance doesn't have to be chaos, right? And so chaos is usually because you've got requirements that are coming down that are very checkbox mentality, and you're being reactive. So separating a world-class GRC program from a checkbox compliance one is someone that basically, whether the business calls you or avoids you, right? So if a business is avoiding you, that's a checkbox mentality. They just want to get you in, they want to get you out, and they want to be done. But when you create efficient, sustainable, repeatable, and most importantly, embedded processes in the work, then you have a GRC program that stands on its own and can withstand any audit.
Yeah, and I can attest, because when we brought UAttest to Jennifer, there was like, okay, this is what the workflow's got to be right. This is why it's got to be for the users. This is why we have to train the reviewers. And these are the documents and materials we need around it to not just do it once, but do it, on a regular basis. So I can.
And that's exactly right. World-class programs use technology such as UAttest to make compliance continuous, not periodic, right? And so many companies, like a checkbox is like, oh, we have to do UARs once a year. So we're going to go ahead and do this. We're going to do this massive Excel spreadsheets. We're going to create all of this stuff. And again, chaos, think chaos. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to send that out to all these different reviewers. And sometimes they're going to get, more than one review, but they're going to have to figure it out. And then we got to collaborate all that stuff back, and we got to commingle it, and we got to review it. That's a lot of time and energy to spend. And so a world-class GRC utilizes programs that are out there, such as UAttest, to create one UAR that gets sent out to all the reviewers at once, right? And that's something that we'll talk about later. That I did. You guys helped us build for Mattel, but UAttest was one that helped us transform 38 application reviews into one single unified process. And that's something that once that's there, it's repeatable. You can do it quarterly, you can do it monthly. It just depends on what you can do. And then you can tackle beyond applications, right? You can tackle your domains, right? You can tackle some of the other non-application security that sometimes, because it's peripheral, gets kind of put on the back burner.
And I have to ask, did you have a mandate to do that when you came to Mattel, or did you say, or do they have like a general idea and you say, I have a vision how we can do this? I'm just curious.
No, what happened is when I got to Mattel, they didn't have a GRC program. They had one person. Yeah. And so I came in as a contractor, which is kind of why I decided to open my own contracting business. But I came in as a contractor. I took a look at what was going on and they were scrambling. Oh, we got to get this evidence. Oh, the auditors need this. Oh, scramble. And it was chaos. And so I came in and the first thing I did, which is, what is the first priority when you want to build a mature GRC program, is I got everybody in the table. I got the external auditors, the internal auditors, and the business, the IT owners. And we sat them down and I said, hey, look, what do you guys need? Where's your control structure? Who owns the controls? Where's the documentation at? Like, let's all get on the same page with what you need. What are your requirements? What are you looking for? And then going to the business. Well, what are you doing? Right? Can we tweak what you're doing to meet this requirement? Because we don't want to redesign everything. Redesign everything takes forever. And we don't want to only give the auditors what they need. We want to build processes that incorporate evidence, but also are repeatable, sustainable processes that is protecting the company, right? That's what the key is to protect the company.
So that was your priority to begin with. You say, great, we got to get rid of the chaos. Okay.
Right.
And give the name of a consultant firm.
It's kind of a play on words, but it's called No Chaos Consulting and Advisory Services, right? Because that's, again, well, I'll shorten it eventually to NCC, right? Because that'll, nobody will really know what that means. But for now, it's kind of like a tongue in cheek, like, hey, that's what you're hiring me, right? If somebody brings me on, that's my goal, is to help you reduce the chaos. Because that's what I'm really good at.
And my brain's going back to our first meetings, and I can see that was your methodology, that it is all over the map, and you're tasking all the stakeholders, including the vendors, right? To say, hold it, you all have to come to the table. You guys have to give me the information, that you got to give me resources, and vendors, you've got to give me a product or a service that actually allows me to make this repeatable.
And we had a challenge at Mattel, right? We had over 38 applications. We had on-prem applications, we had SaaS applications, we had cloud applications, we had everything, right? And so that was the one thing, is there was no one GRC tool out there that could do everything, right? That could do all of those at once. That wasn't going to cost over $1 million, right? And that wasn't going to cost 2 years of time to configure, right? To make something. And so when I went shopping for a product to help us do this, I wasn't looking for necessarily the end solution. What I was looking for was something that could fit within what we needed. And what we needed was one review. I wanted a way to be able to ingest to all of that data into one system, and then be able to send that out in one complete review, so that one manager would get access for all of the applications that their people had access to. And you could see holistically, oh, wait, this person has payroll, and they have the HR system. Whoa, that's kind of an SOD. As a manager, now I can make some decisions around what access they have. And it was a challenge, right? Your system required some heavy lifting, right, from us to normalize that data, but your tool allowed us to upload the data and submit that out, which saved hundreds of hours of time in compilations, in understanding that they could make notes, right? Remove this, and this is not authorized. And when we had to have very specific, the auditors wanted approval. I need the word approved. I don't want a checkbox. You went out and you built us that functionality.
And I think we should bring it up to people, which is you got to pick your partners that are willing to make the modifications, because we did. You did.
And it wasn't always easy, right?
No, no,
Sometimes
but
we didn't see eye to eye. Sometimes it was many iterations of like,
yeah,
we're missing this, or can we still do this? And but you guys really helped us to, I had a vision and I knew
yes,
what I wanted to do.
yes,
And you guys really worked to help me execute that vision. And what we got was a repeatable, a sustainable, and an efficient process that now Mattel's doing quarterly now instead of annually.
yeah, and that's
That's
it.
amazing.
They can do it. So, look, given your role, because GRC is definitely at the intersection of of the business and compliance. How did you balance the security, compliance, internal audits, legal and privacy, all that in your job?
It's a challenge. So, the first thing you got to do is you got to figure out the first advice is you can't take on everything at once, right? There's so much. Remember, GRC encompasses so much. Some people don't even know what GRC is. They're like, "Oh, I know the acronym, but what does it actually do?" And the reality is that you just got to get in there and you do a risk assessment, right? Talk to the CFO, talk to the CEO. What's keeping you guys up tonight? Talk to the CISO, talk to the auditors. What are their priorities, right? And from there, you just understand what is it that we need to do, and then you break it off into chunks, right? Deal with the stuff that's easier first, right? Get those quick wins out of the way, and then you tackle piece at a time, and also getting a good team, right? Empowering your team to be able to go out and investigate the problems, try to solve those problems. And the key bottom line is your controls, right? If you start with your controls, and your controls are what you're fulfilling and monitoring, then you can tackle additional criteria and additional things as they come in to expand your roadmap for whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's AI compliance, whether it's policies and procedures. Do you know how many companies don't have IT policies and procedures that are kept up to date? They rely on like auditor narratives most of the time, right? And that for me, that's crazy. How would somebody coming into the role know what they're supposed to do if they don't have that documented? But people just don't have.
That's really a good point, because we're doing a lot of discussions with teams around AI, and both the NIST AI RMF and the ISO 4201 start with making sure your company has a policy on AI.
Right. And also it's getting on the same page, right? Like,
yeah,
I GRC am not going to go tackle something that the auditors don't think is a priority, right? That the IT owners don't think is a priority. Like, that just doesn't create balance, right? So you want to get everybody's kind of viewpoint, create that risk matrix, right? Prioritize, tackle the quick wins, and then get help where you can, right? For the other stuff. And then that's where you're delivering. You're delivering on the auditors and they're happy. You're delivering on your, making your IT owners more, more efficient. They're happy, right? You've got metrics that you're giving to the, your controls are in place and getting monitored. Now your CFO is happy, your CIO is happy. So that's really what.
It's interesting. We just had a CFO left the last audit Tuesday to talk about her role in GRC, and I have to ask you, who were your allies in getting things done? And I wouldn't say who were your enemies, but who were the foot draggers?
I can't talk about the enemies. I don't want to
no
hurt anybody's feelings, but I mean, unfortunately, what happens is your allies in a GRC situation have to be the CISO. If you're reporting to the CISO, it has to be the CIO if that's your level of chain, or if you're reporting to the CFO, which in some cases, some do, that has to be your ally. So, and the IT owners, right? Those are the folks that you're truly almost like, I look at GRC as almost the interpreter, right? Like, I'm talking to everybody, but I got to interpret what they're saying to what they're saying and getting everybody kind of on the same page. And, in many situations, sometimes you find audits that are collaborative, and that's great. And they want to come in and they all want to work together. And sometimes you don't. I think that's where the biggest chaos kind of comes from is, you might have an internal audit team that maybe they didn't do proper planning. Maybe they're scrambling because the external auditors aren't doing their planning early enough. So you get this cascading effect of urgency where it comes from maybe external to urgency to internal urgency, then they scramble, then they push back on the business and ends GRC, right? And so then it becomes this constant kind of chaos methodology. And if you can work all together and understand what everybody needs up front and kind of that expectations, then as GRC you can kind of navigate through that and lessen the chaos. But in many cases, I would say, sometimes you're just battling egos, right? Where somebody wants it to be this way and, hell or high water, that's the way it's going to be, or they're going to make your life difficult. And it's like, wait, we're just here to fix things, right? We're just here to, secure the company. So I think that's the biggest challenge.
And did you negotiate with the external auditors ever, or was it just like ones and zeros? This is how it has.
No, always. I mean, again, when I first started there, in external audit and internal audit weren't talking to each other. They were, but not really. Right.
Yeah.
External audit had their own set of controls. Internal audit had their own set of controls. GRC had their own set of controls, and none of them matched. None of them. So we had 3 different sets of people testing 3 different sets of things. And the reality is the business ignored GRC. They just ignored it. We don't want to do this. We're already doing 2 other sets of work. Your stuff is dumb. We don't want to do it. Right. And so that was one of the biggest challenges I had, was like, oh, well, how do we add value here? And so I go to, I did a benchmarking. Give me your controls that you're testing, because give me your controls you're testing. I benchmarked it myself and then came up with gaps and went back to the table and said, hey, we've got these kind of gaps. And they were like, oh, well, we don't need that control. Or, oh no, that control is really important. So it started the dialogue, right?
Nice.
So again, external auditors, they're the ones that are signing off on your financials. So, they do have a little bit more weight than maybe your internal folks. But at the same time, you want to build through and have that open dialogue. And that's what you do. It's just an open dialogue, right? No contentiousness. We're not here to be better than anyone else. And that's what we built, right? We built that. And it was great. And it was very collaborative. And then you can really focus on getting things done.
No, that's a good behind the scenes that I even know about it. Okay, so obviously we work together pretty much on identity and identity GRC and governance. And we see this now more and more in enterprises. How do you see identity now that you're in a consulting practice and talking to enterprises? How do you see that they should be prioritizing identity and identity governance?
Well, identity and identity governance is a very, very interesting thing. You talk about provisioning, you're talking about deprovisioning, and you're talking about user access reviews. Now, remember, historically, most companies are focused on SOX, right? Because that's the one that everybody, if you're a public company, that's what you got to get right. And so when they talk about granting access, you have to have your tickets, you have to have approvals, you have to do all that. And then you have to deprovisioning, right? You got to remove that access. You got to make sure that that's there. And then UARs, many companies, because of the volume of a UAR, they're really cherry picking. Well, we're going to do a UAR on sensitive access. We're going to do a UAR on financial access only. And so what you're doing is you're leaving on the table all of this risk, right, that somebody subjectively has decided. And so when you get a tool like UAttest, where you can take the roles, you can do a little work and understand what are the functions of these roles and document that, right? So if you're doing your job documenting the functions, then using your tool to get that out to the folks in a consolidated fashion, and reviewing areas that maybe don't get reviewed, like AD groups. Did you know most AD groups, when a person is terminated, they only terminate application access and the AD account itself. Most groups, that user ID is still sitting in that group somewhere in Azure. And now you've got a credential that's sitting out in the cloud that just needs somebody with a high level authority to go ahead and reactivate that. And now you may have keys to the kingdom. So that's where your tool, or any tool, right? But your tool does the same thing, where you can then build those processes in to take a look at those things, right? Because you don't only want to do provisioning and deprovisioning. The other area that a lot of folks, identity governance, don't look at, and AI is going to be a big game changer in this. You've got we used to call them service accounts, right? I'm dating myself. Yeah. Okay, so we had all these service accounts.
We're doing a whole new release around service accounts, but it's like, I say service accounts or NHI.
Right. I don't know what the new terminology is, right? With AI, it could be, I don't know. They're using some of their terminology now, but essentially AI accounts are essentially service accounts, right? And service accounts have been the least reviewed and the highest risk profiles for every organization. Every breach you've ever seen is done typically through a service account because there was no documented owner. There was no documented review of that account. People thought, oh, it's connecting this thing. And so we don't want to break it, right?
Right.
We
And
don't want to
Jennifer,
move it because we don't want to
100%,
break it.
because we just did a public release on NHI's non-human identities. And
That's what it is. There you go.
The customers asked us to do is, well, the auditors and the security guys want to make sure there is a heartbeat associated with every NHI. That is who owns this account, so they can be held accountable for the actual access rights of that NHI, which is basically just a service account that's running across your enterprise in a good way or a bad. And how much permissions did the enterprise get it? Yeah, that's what we're doing.
That's correct. That's correct.
That's a good one.
And that's going to be key as we move forward through, as more companies implement AI, and implementing AI in a bubble, right? Or going to cloud-based services. You know, people think cloud-based services, oh, well, the access should be great. But in many cloud-based services, not only do you have the actual access to the service itself, but then you have containers, right? Where individuals are building access within those containers. And that's not typically part of your user access review. People typically aren't going to that owner and saying, hey, you have this container with all this data, right? Because remember, data is going to be king. How do you protect your data? How do you protect people's data, right? We've got this convergence of privacy across all these sectors. And eventually it's going to be, who owns this data? How are we using this data? Who has access to this data? And a lot of companies can't even answer that question because they were so excited about doing the thing that they didn't understand that, well, we need to build security controls around this. And now you're placing out there a vulnerability that they have to go back later and clean up. And then that cleanup takes money, cost, time, right? Or they get a breach and then they learn and they have to pay the hard way.
So you mentioned, communication to the other groups, to the internal and external audits, and you implied there were some types of controls or metrics that you were dialoguing with them. What did you do? Were these KPIs, KRIs that you communicated, and how did you communicate?
Well, the one beautiful thing about what I did at Mattel, right, was we ended up having one GRC system. So they had a system called Archer. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but it was, at the time I came in, it was antiquated, right? It didn't have anything. It was, the controls were there, but nobody was really doing anything with them. And, internal audit didn't have theirs. And of course, external audit had, everybody was on spreadsheets. So that was the first thing we did is once we got everything cleaned up, we put it in a repository like Archer, right? And with Archer, it was great because then you could give the auditors access. They could go in and, operations could run their monthly campaigns, right? To make sure those controls were working and getting that evidence uploaded. And then the auditors could go in and select that evidence and see, their source reports that they needed, go ahead and select those samples. And then you could run reports. Who was outdated? Who wasn't, fulfilling these requests? How long was it outstanding? Did the control pass or fail, right? Did we have any process improvements, right? Were there things that we needed to fix? So it was reports like that we would build for not only the auditors, the deficiency list, right? Having a cohesive deficiency list and then having the remediation KPIs, right? Here's all our deficiencies. Here's, what we've been able to remediate. Here's what the auditors have tested. So we know that remediation is closed, right? Bridging that information between what the auditors are doing and what management is doing was extremely helpful because then you could give it to every party, right? Then you had the external auditors and internal auditors and the CFO and the CIO all on the same page with where we were at any given time. And, UAR was another great example, like where are we at with getting all these access reviewed? Then we could escalate, right? If we knew manager, XYZ in Indonesia, hadn't done his reviews for the last 2 weeks, well, we can reach out to his supervisor, right? We can escalate across the board. And so tools like that, where you actually have, that data, where you're utilizing that data, have been, amazing to help, auditors understand where we're at, and help, the business understand where we still need to go.
And did you use like the metrics, like you would say we did, 8,000, reviews this quarter. Now we're doing 9,000. Did you, share that with the teams and all that?
Well, in many cases, ours was pretty static, right? So we
Okay.
had 10,000 individuals that were getting reviewed because it was
Yeah.
it was the whole population. Now remember, we weren't parsing out. These 37 applications covered 10,000 individual users. You remember our big, we had millions of lines that we had to ingest into your system, and we stress tested the fact that can your system handle such a huge caseload on an enterprise, an enterprise level, and you could, right? I mean, we got there, and
that's what we did. Yes,
you guys increased speed, you guys increased your bandwidth, you guys increased your notifications, right? And so that was it, right? We were able to basically use UAttest, give the supervisors access where they could go in at any time and see where they were at, right? The CFO dashboard of, here's what has been completed percentage wise. So you could go and see, oh, Asia hasn't finished their review yet. Where's, and then you could reach out to the Asia,
nice.
Folks and say, hey, we gotta do this. And that's kind of built in to, to some of the dashboard reporting that you guys have had, which was absolutely invaluable.
You can't manage what you can't measure, right?
That's exactly right. And it was, and we could push back, right? If something wasn't reviewed properly, the beauty is that we could push back and say, no, we need to have this re-reviewed. Or, hey, this manager's out on vacation. We're going to go ahead and delegate that to somebody else, and they could delegate it to somebody else. I mean, that was the beauty of it, right? And then you build rules for us, which I love, right? We want to make sure that people aren't reviewing their own access. That was a big one that we were doing manually. You came in and like, nah, we can handle that for you. So that there is the system will lock you out and not allow you to review your own access, which made the auditors extremely happy. So there was a lot of just great stuff that came in that we were able to kind of give everybody comfort and, on the KPIs and the KRIs with, how we could do 10,000 user access reviews in less than a month, right? With over 2,000 supervisors.
Exactly. The scale was enormous. When you're talking 10,000 reviews,
Yeah.
But we did it. Okay. I'm going to jump back into AI a little and give some wisdom to the audience about, because you hear it both ways, real proactive, GRC people like yourself, right? And then there's ones I would hear from other management types who are like, well, Garrett, there's no regulation on AI, which I don't believe is true because it's an entity having access to data. So there's tons of regulations.
Right.
What's your take on that? How do you communicate to enterprises what the role of governance is with AI right now, and where they should be now and where they should be going towards?
Well, I think part of it is that, at a very minimum, right? As a company is implementing AI, very minimum you should be doing is a privacy review, right? And a data review. And when I say privacy, I'm really more talking about data governance, right? Because I think that's one underreported area that a lot of companies just haven't even gotten to yet, right? Data governance is going to be huge in terms of what does this AI do? Where does it make decisions, right? Whose data is it using? Especially if it's a third-party vendor. Because many AIs are not being homegrown, right? Many companies are going out to market to get their AIs. And so the question becomes, what is the compliance around this AI? Does a SOC 2 cover AI compliance? Depends, right? Depends on what is in that SOC 2, right? And it depends on what your AI is actually doing. But it's the actual questions of your security and privacy teams of, this AI tool that we're going to use. Where's the data coming from? Is it used to train the model? Where's it getting stored? Is it stored in a third party? Is it stored in a third party, right? So now you've got many vendors that have the AI. And so there you go. It becomes a huge challenge. And yes, governments are always going to be behind where the risk is. And I think that's what I would tell the organizations who say, nah, there's no compliance out there right now. We don't have to do anything. We're fine. It's like, yeah, you just heard about, OpenAI and Claude basically going and hacking third parties for the fun of it. Wasn't,
Jennifer, there was a comment from the CFO on this podcast that said, enterprises have to realize, and I think you live by this,
Yeah,
liability precedes regulation.
that is correct. That is
Yeah.
correct.
I mean,
And
that's
then
what's
it's
going
accountability though, right? Because a
right.
lot of companies are going to be like, well, my AI platform you're directing. So you're the responsible party. But if your AI platform is built in to take our data, to use that data to train your model, and your model does something based on that, well, that's a change management problem,
Yeah.
right? So that's what's still blurry, right? And most contracts don't even cover AI. They don't even cover AI
As one auditor
regulations
told me,
or
Garrett, yes, there will be new regulations, but he doesn't even think there has to be, because he goes, the regulations are basically stating you have accountability for the data you hold. And it's not saying whether a user gets it or an NHI
right,
gets it. It has to do with access to the data.
right,
So now that we're adding new entities, which happen to be NHIs, not human identities,
all
so
the
what? You're
time.
still responsible for what access they get in all the other quantifications and governance around it, what
Right.
permissions they have, what you're doing with the data, et cetera.
That's right. That's right. I think one area that I think is going to come down as becoming one of the biggest regulatory trends that we haven't seen yet, but I think is going to be companies that can get ahead of this are going to be golden. So
Yeah,
I think continuous compliance is going to eventually replace point in time audits.
nice.
I think
Yes.
I think point in time audits that auditors are doing now, and I think they're antiquated, and I think the big firms, big four, and they're already starting to do this, are realizing that they're antiquated. They want to come in and they want to scan your entire environment. They want to find every deficiency, right? Whether it's related to financials or not, that scope is expanding tremendously. Now, companies can still say, well, if it's not financially related, then you shouldn't be able to do any of that. But remember, there's cybersecurity SEC regulations now that basically have that broad vision that cover almost all access, right? Because a cybersecurity breach caused from access to a non-financial system, still a breach, still has to be reported, still impacts your financials. And many companies are not ready for that.
No.
They're not ready because they're not looking there, because they haven't had the bandwidth, the time, the tool, the energy to go beyond basic SOX. And that's where that continuous compliance monitoring is going to be the key for companies surviving that.
So we got a question from one of the listeners in real time. If an AI system makes a decision that violates company policy, who actually owns the risk? The developer, the security team, the business, the leadership?
Well, that's a great question. That is all, I mean, in my experience, and again, I'm going to opinionize this.
Yeah.
I would say it's all based on your contract, right? That's why your third party vendor management is absolutely critical. When you onboard a new vendor, especially an AI vendor, and we were doing this at Mattel,
Yeah.
you have to do a thorough security review. You have to make sure that if the AI violates, and you write that in there, if the AI violates company policy, the vendor is liable.
Wow.
That's
Okay.
standard legal verbiage, right? In your contract. Okay. You also make sure, many companies don't do this. Make sure you have an audit clause, right? Make sure you have data retention in your contracts, right? To say that they can't use our data unless we explicitly give them data to use, right? And that way, if the AI just happens to scrape, because that's part of its, it's part of its job, is, oh, I'm gonna utilize this information that that from this company in my learning and in my environment. If you don't explicitly have that, then you're right. There's no regulation right now to show who's culpable. So get your legal teams to review every vendor onboarding contract. Get your security teams to review the product. See how this AI works. What is the programming? Explain how the AI is used. Every third-party vendor should be able to explain how their AI is used, the rationale that their AI is using. And then get your privacy and security team in there, your data privacy team, to whether it's a legal privacy or whether it's your IT privacy, get them to also review the vendor, right? Get the SOC 2 reports, make sure that this vendor is up to par and understand what vendors they're using as well.
Jennifer, I don't think anyone is better equipped with that than us in the relationship we had. You're very good with stating the company's policies, objectives, where they want to go, and then working with the vendors and saying, okay, this is where we need to go,
Right.
And that's a very credible answer there. Okay. Last formal question is, so you come on as a new GRC person in the enterprise.
Yeah.
How do you build, as you did with Mattel, build credibility, build, support, build, the relationships that you need to have to actually conduct your job?
Well, the first thing you got to do is leave your ego at the door, right? You're not, and even if you're an expert, even if you're a C-level, even if you're a VP, even if you're high level, even if you're brand new and entry level, leave your ego at the door, right? Get to know what people are doing. Go speak with the IT folks. How do you do this? How does this control work? What is it that you're doing? Go talk to the auditors. How are you guys doing your testing? Do you have a copy of your controls? Like, what are the deficiencies that you found in the past, right? Go to your external auditors. What PCAOB every year has a hotbed topic. They come out every year with a hotbed topic, and every single big firm picks up on that and runs with it for the year. I've seen it for the past 20 years, right? Whether it's IPEs, right? Whether it's programming code, I think that was a couple of years ago, was, you had to make sure all your code, programming code was up to par. And so what you want to do is you want to understand where they're coming from. What are you guys hearing coming down from the PCAOB? What are you hearing coming down from the SEC? What are the critical things that are on your radar for the year, right? Get ahead of these conversations and then take that information and you kind of, marinate with it, marry it together. And the goal is be helpful, right? As a GRC person, I'm not here to build the perfect answer for everybody. I'm here to be the liaison to make people's lives easier and to protect the company from risk, right? And how I do that is I got to make friends, but I also have to be able to push back and say, hey, this isn't going to cut it. And here's why. And here's what we need to do, right?
Yeah, I think when something you said that you often do is you add value. By adding value, people respect and want to work with you.
Right. And then they come to you, right? Like in GRC, even though we weren't doing a lot of the work, right? People would come to us and be like, hey, the auditors have this question. How do we answer this, right? Like, this is what we want to do, or hey, we got to build this solution that fixes this. What are your, and then they would get us ahead of time, right? All these implementations that we had, we were doing Pictionary AI, and first thing they called me on the phone and were like, hey, can you come and like take a look and see, are we approaching this right? Are we setting ourselves up for a compliance headache down the line? And then you come in and you're like, oh, okay, we, take a look at this, or, oh, be careful of this, right? And we were able to work with them to, create this amazing product that was compliant, right? Yeah. And it did it up front. And you were part of that process. And that's what you want to be. GRC wants to be part of the process. You don't want to be at the end, right?
And that's probably a really good point for people to realize. It is a process. It's not the ones that, and as we started this conversation, chaos stops when you start at the end and you just start scramble. But that's right. Process, then it's controlled. All right, great stuff. So Jennifer, how can people contact you? Talk a little about what you're doing in your enterprise and how they can contact you.
Yeah, so it's pretty simple. I'm on LinkedIn. Go ahead and reach out and connect with me there. You can send a message to me there. And then I can also, give my email address. I don't have a corporate one yet. It's still just my Gmail, but it's jfelix-shannon@gmail.com. That's a great way to get a hold of me as well. But that's it. Reach out if you have a question. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to, if you just, you're brainstorming something, I'm a great person to listen. 30 minutes, I can help you, brainstorm something through. But if you need help, I'm also here for that as well. So come in and talk about what you need and how I might be able to help, and how we can reduce the chaos, right?
Yeah, and here at UTest, we'll help you get a hold of her too. And she is as helpful as she's come across as on this webinar. We at UTest, we can be reached at uatest.com or info@uatest.com, or just ping me, Garrett Grayjack, on LinkedIn. Great stuff, Jennifer.
Amazing.
Good
Well,
stuff.
thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. It was fun.
It was fun. All the best.